The other interesting thing for me about the haircutting is that, in a way, it makes Lee more popular. You know, she's the girl who cuts hair and she does it really well. But also, it kind of puts her in a subservient position. She's the hair cutter.
I agree completely with both of those sort of assessments.
Anyway, Inigo, thank you very much for your question. And the next question for you, Curtis Sittenfeld, was rung in from the West Midlands in England, from Baljit Sidhu. And here she is to ask it.
Hi, it's Bal from the West Midlands. Curtis, I love prep. I recognise so much of myself in Lee, especially all those questions and all those awkward moments as a teenager. But I was wondering whether you ever had any pressure from editors or so forth about heightening the plot or making it more dramatic.
Well, that's interesting. You were just talking about, you didn't want there to be explosions and deaths and murders and so on and so forth. But did you get pressure from editors saying, hang on, we could do with a bit more drama?
So that's kind of a complicated question where the short answer is no, but the longer answer is I think the book almost didn't sell. And so maybe it was the absence of a sort of more dramatic external plot.
You mean you almost didn't sell to a publishing house?
Yeah, so what happened was I had an agent and she submitted it in the US to 15 publishers and 14 out of the 15 said no. And then one, Random House, ultimately did make an offer, which I feel like, thank the heavens above. And actually, I'm now coming up on my 20th anniversary with Random House. I think that the feedback that when the editors rejected it, they didn't necessarily say not enough happens. I think some said it's about a teenager, but it seems like it's for adults, and so I wouldn't know how to kind of market it or sell it, but it kind of contributed to the feeling of I can't sell it, that there wasn't some like murder in the middle of it.
Well, there may not be murders, there are no murders, but there is, obviously, with a cast of teenagers, there is quite a lot of sexual tension going on throughout the novel. And you've mentioned the guy, Cross Sugarman, who's this very good-looking, high-status guy in the school. And if we could just have another reading from the book. This is where Lee has just been to the movies with Cross and with two other guys. And on the way back in the taxi, Lee finds herself sitting next to Cross.
Well, and also I should say, when you say she's been to the movies with him, I mean, I guess if people have read this, they'll know. It's sort of like, unfortunately for Lee, it's not like they went on a date. It's more like they ran into each other on this school holiday, and she happened to sit next to him. And it was the most exciting thing that ever happened to her. Okay. John was still talking when Cross lifted his left arm. At first, I thought he was setting it on the seat behind my back, and I felt a bolt of anticipation in my chest. Then I realized he was setting it on me. His hand cupped my shoulder, and there was the slightest pull, a pull toward him. I gave into it. My body fell against his, my leg pressed to his leg, my arm filling the hollow between us, the top of my head just below his collarbone. This development struck me as remarkable. There I was, with Cross's arm around me, when Martin or John could have turned at any moment and seen, but it also seemed unsurprising. Sitting in the diner earlier in the day, I had thought how much I wanted to be touching Cross, and now I was. I could feel the rise and fall of his chest, and we matched each other well, our bodies fit. I didn't know enough then to realize that doesn't always happen, that sometimes you cannot settle on an angle with the other person. Your weight won't balance, your bones poke.
Curtis Sittenfeld, thank you very much indeed. And on the phone now with a question from Sydney in Australia, we have Claire. Claire, hello.
Hi, how are you going tonight?
Good.
Hey, we have a time difference. Curtis, I'm really excited to hear your voice, and I really enjoyed that reading. The Cross-Sugarman relationship with Lee, it was an interesting one for me. I felt your heroine was so relatable that when she began to sleep with the hot boy at school, it bummed me out because I didn't do that. Anyway, he became a little less so relatable. What role does sex play in prep? And would you have written the sex in it any differently if you were writing the book now?
Oh, those are interesting questions.
Claire, if you had got the hot guy at school, would that have made a big difference to your reading of the novel?
Maybe I would have been like, wow, just like me. But I think it's such a great book for like the kind of the girl who feels like an outcast and an outsider and someone who loves to watch and feel themselves to be a little apart from everything. So I really sort of went, oh, okay, she got the guy. Can't relate.
You know, it's funny because in some ways to me, that's what a novel has to do. Like actually, I still remember, and this is now more than 20 years ago, I remember like sort of typing this sentence where Lee and her father are having a fight and she looks at him and she can tell that he wants to slap her. And then I think I thought to myself, like sitting at my desk, you know, in graduate school in Iowa, I thought, this is a novel. He needs to slap her. Like the thing that almost happens in real life should happen. And I feel like that's actually kind of a guiding force in fiction for me, that the thing, like often in life, something could have happened that's much more dramatic than what did happen. And it's like on the page, that's what should happen, because a novel needs to be more interesting and sort of more heightened compared to real life. And so I think that like, it's possible that the outsider girl, it's probably much likelier than in real life the outsider girl does not sleep with the hot boy, but because this is a novel, she does. So the question of whether I would write it differently today is interesting. I probably would for multiple reasons, including that I am so much older now, you know. So okay, let me think of the sort of math of this. I was about 24 years old when I started writing prep. I'm now about almost twice as old. I'll turn 48 in a few months. And so I was much closer to being a high school student than I am now. And I think, like, obviously there's a conversation about gender and power and sex that's kind of become heightened in the last few years. I mean, I think that conversation has always existed, but it's really become more prominent. So yes, I think but I feel like almost everything about the novel would be different. Like, I think that I could access a high school sensibility, not a universal high school sensibility, but like a particular character's sensibility much more easily. I think I was very in touch with my own adolescent self at the time that I started writing it. Like I had, you know, if I was 24, I had graduated. I had graduated from boarding school myself less than 7 years before when I started writing it.
Well, Claire, thank you very much indeed. And Curtis Sittenfeld, thank you. We've got lots more listeners' questions about prep, but first a quick pause for the news. And to remind you that there's an archive of well over 200 World Book Club interviews you can access via our website. Back soon, the news after this.
ABC News Radio, Australia's only 24-hour radio news network. Local, national and international stories. Independent, live, up-to-the-minute coverage. On broadcast, streaming and the ABC Listen app. Know the story with ABC News Radio.
And thanks for being with us here on ABC News Radio. I'm Mandy Breslin, and I'll be back with you in around 30 minutes with a news update. Time now, though, to take you to our broadcast partners at Deutsche Welle for this week's World in Progress.
DW, World in Progress. With Sarah Steffen.
This week's show is all about music and its power to change societies. In Kashmir, young people are turning to rap to make their voices heard. But as of late, they have been moving away from certain topics.
Rappers, singers, and artists.
Maya said, "Hi son, unfortunately I cannot work next weekend 13th, 14th. as I have a couple of assessments that I need the weekend to prepare for. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Would you like to reply?
Okay, thank Mia.
It says, Thank Mia. Do you want to send it or change it?
Change.
What do you want to say to Maya?
Okay, thank you.
It says, Okay, thank you. Send it?
Yes.
Done.
And ask questions.
Hip-hop artist Miss Raisa speaks out against prejudice, racism and sexism.
Que es cierto que cuando te crías en mitad de dos culturas diferentes, de muchos idiomas, ¿no?
When you grow up between two different cultures, many different languages and ways of thinking, it becomes difficult to construct your own identity. Wherever I am the girl from somewhere else. Here, the immigrant. But when I'm on vacation in Morocco, I'm a foreigner there too.
All that and more coming up now. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Sarah Steffen. And we start the show in Peru. The country in South America has been rocked by bloody protests for months. Protests broke out in early December after former President Pedro Castillo was impeached and arrested. Human Rights Watch has accused Peru's authorities of turning a blind eye as security forces committed, quote, extrajudicial and arbitrary killings of protesters. Cue Renata Flores, a 22-year-old Quechuan singer who sings and raps in Quechua, the indigenous language of the Andean people, a people who've suffered discrimination and have been disadvantaged for centuries. In one of her latest songs, she denounces police violence during the protests. She says the protests are driven by deep-rooted inequity that has defined Peru for centuries. Flores says she wants to shine a light on this almost forgotten part of Peruvian history through her music. Neil King has this report by Anna Herberg.
The sky is crying over your departure, Renata Flores sings in Quechua, the indigenous language of the Andes. But this isn't a love song, far from it. The song is dedicated to the victims of the bloody protests that have rocked Peru for several months. 10 people were killed in Ayacucho, Flores' hometown, in mid-December, when a massacre reportedly occurred in the city.
It was terrible. Helicopters circled over the neighborhood. There was a lot of gunfire. Tear gas came in through the window. We heard gunfire. People were running down the streets. Soldiers were chasing them like in a video game. We heard there were dead people. We were shocked.
In Ayacucho, like elsewhere in Peru, people had taken to the streets to protest against the ousting of leftist President Pedro Castillo, calling for fresh elections. The new government sent in the military and police. Amnesty International reported more than 60 deaths, many of them killed by security forces. Amnesty International says authorities are targeting the indigenous rural population in particular.
It was made out by the government as if these people were all terrorists. This opens up wounds from the past, especially here in Ayacucho.
In the 80s and